4 war horses, 4 decorated veterans of the mountain supply routes in Kunar Province, and on a Tuesday morning at Fort Crestwood outside Laramie, Wyoming, all 4 of them had reached the end of something. The base veterinarian had been watching it build for 7 weeks. She had filed 4 written recommendations. She had walked into the administrator's office 4 different times and walked out 4 different times with nothing but a stamped notation that said, "Received." The euthanasia recommendation landed on that same desk at 0830 on a Tuesday, and nobody who signed it felt good about it. Nobody had a better option. Then Nina Farrow walked through the stable gate, carrying a canvas bag and a cup of coffee from the canteen 2 buildings over, and Sentinel, the gray quarter horse who had been throwing himself against the stall wall for 40 minutes, went still. Not sedated, not restrained, still. The kind of still that makes experienced handlers look at each other across the aisle without saying a word, because they both understand what produced it, and what produced it is not something you find in a training manual. If you're the kind of person who stays until the end, this story is for you. Follow along, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The situation had been building since September. That was when Administrator Keith Dunmore, a 53-year-old career bureaucrat who had spent exactly 0 days working around military animals of any kind, had quietly redirected the behavioral health contract for the Fort Crestwood Equine Rehabilitation Program to cover a fencing repair project that had already been funded from a separate line item. The contract had cost $9,600 annually. It covered twice-monthly sessions with a certified equine behavioral specialist, handler protocol training, and environmental assessments for animals transitioning out of combat service. After September, none of that existed anymore. What remained were 4 horses, 2 handlers whose combined experience totaled 18 months, and Dr. Serena Platt, who was a veterinarian and was not a behavioral specialist and had been saying so in writing since the Dunmore cut the contract. The 4 horses in the rehabilitation stable had between them served across 3 combat theaters in 9 years. Sentinel, the gray quarter horse, had carried medical resupply through mountain passes in conditions that broke equipment faster than they broke the animals. Cobalt, a dark bay mare with one ear permanently angled from a pressure wave injury she'd survived while her handler hadn't, had learned over 4 years of deployment to treat every unexpected sound as a threat and had not unlearned it since returning stateside. Dusk was a roan gelding, quieter than the others, who had spent 4 years bonded to a single handler before that handler was medevaced home with a spinal injury. Dusk had been reassigned twice after that and had become the kind of animal that was technically functional and spiritually absent, present in the body and somewhere else entirely. And Flint. Flint was an 11-year-old bay gelding who had spent 3 years on casualty evacuation routes in eastern Afghanistan, moving through terrain where vehicles couldn't follow, alongside a handler named Corporal Thomas Ames. Ames had died 14 months ago in a river crossing during a night casevac, in a flash flood that took 3 seconds and offered no one a choice about anything. Flint had been recovered downstream 2 days later. He had not allowed a human within arm's reach since the memorial. He didn't attack. He withdrew. He stood in the far back corner of his stall with his head angled away from the door, eating just enough to maintain weight, responding to nothing, waiting for something that Platt had stopped being able to name. She had been building a euthanasia consultation for Flint for 2 months, not because he was dangerous, because she didn't know what else to offer him, and watching an animal disappear from the inside was its own kind of failure. Private First Class Lucas Byrne was 19 years old and had been assigned to the stable for 3 months when Sentinel kicked him hard enough to put him 6 feet from where he'd been standing, with 2 cracked ribs and whatever confidence he'd been carrying that morning. Byrne didn't lose consciousness. He lay very still on the concrete and didn't make a sound, which was either the bravest thing or the most frightened thing a person could do, and it turned out it didn't matter which. By 0730, the incident report was 12 pages long, and Platt was standing in Dunmore's office, having the 4th version of the same conversation. The behavioral health contract covers equine trauma assessment, environment modification, and handler protocol training, she said, keeping her voice deliberate and flat. All three of those things are what's happening right now in my stable, and I don't have anyone qualified to address them. Dunmore looked at her the way he looked at most things he found inconvenient. We have you. I'm a veterinarian, Platt said. I treat physical injuries. I am not a behavioral specialist. The contract renewal is $9,600, he said, a line item I've already allocated. To what? She said. Fencing materials. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. Director Dunmore, Platt said carefully, one of my horses just sent a 19-year-old to the infirmary with broken ribs. That's the third handler injury in 6 weeks. I have 4 written recommendations on that desk that you've received and not acted on, and I have a euthanasia recommendation on the same desk that I do not want to execute. Dunmore folded his hands. I appreciate the urgency, Doctor. I'll review the situation. She left his office before she said something she couldn't take back. She was standing at the stable entrance, rubbing her face with both hands and trying to inventory her actual options, when Corporal Jamie Weston appeared at her elbow with a clipboard and said quietly, Dr. Platt, there's someone at the South Gate. She works in the base medical clinic, and she's asking to come in here. Platt turned. Asking to come in where, exactly? Here, Weston said. To the stable. The woman at the gate was 29 years old, 5'4", wearing dark blue scrubs under a canvas field jacket, with a patch on the shoulder that had once had text on it and was now mostly the memory of text. She was carrying a canvas bag and a paper coffee cup from the canteen, and her dark hair was pulled back in a knot that was functional rather than considered. Her name was Nina Farrow. Platt had seen her twice at morning briefings in the base clinic and had registered almost nothing about her beyond the fact that she was covering a maternity leave in the ER and was not someone who spoke more than was necessary. I heard about the situation, Nina said. Her voice was easy, not nervous. I thought I might be able to help. With the horses, Platt said. With the horses. What's your background with them? Nina looked at the ground for half a second, then back up. Some field experience. I'd rather show you than try to explain it. That should have ended the conversation. Protocol at Fort Crestwood was unambiguous. No uncredentialed personnel in the rehabilitation stable during an active behavioral incident. Platt knew the protocol. She also knew that her alternatives were Dunmore's fencing budget and whatever she could manage alone. She opened the gate. Master Sergeant Raymond Kobie ran handler operations for the Equine Rehabilitation Program, which was a title that had not caught up to the reality on the ground since September. He was 47, had the face of a man weathered rather than aged, and did not like surprises. He looked at Nina the way career military looks at civilians who say they have backgrounds with things. Careful, skeptical, not hostile yet. What kind of field experience? Equine medical support, Nina said. That's not an answer. I know. His jaw tightened. He turned to Platt. At the far end of the aisle, Sentinel hit the stall wall hard enough to vibrate the floor. Everyone in the corridor startled except Nina. She turned toward the sound without flinching, set her coffee cup on the nearest post, and then walked toward Sentinel's stall at a pace that had a quality to it Kobie couldn't immediately name. Not slow and not fast. Something in between that carried its own weight. She stopped 6 feet from the gate. Her hands were at her sides. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Hey, I've got you." Sentinel stopped hitting the wall. He circled, made a sound low in his chest, and within 90 seconds had dropped his head and exhaled. Still watchful. Not throwing himself against anything. At the far end of the stable, Cobalt, who had been pacing without stopping for 2 hours, stopped pacing. She stood with her nose up, reading the air, and then stood some more. "How did you do that?" Kobie said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Nina looked at the horse. "Sentinel's been responding to pressure every time someone approaches," she said. "His threat response has been fully activated for weeks, and he keeps getting confirmation that the threat is real because every person who comes near him is carrying anxiety in their body. He's not looking for authority right now. He's looking for something that isn't afraid of him." She paused. "He needs stillness, not volume." Kobie looked at the horse, then at Nina, then at Platt. Platt gave him the expression of someone actively managing not to say anything. He didn't finish the sentence he'd started. He didn't need to. Director Dunmore arrived at the stable at Zo 945 and arrived the way Dunmore arrived everywhere, in the manner of a man who expected to find that things had resolved themselves and would require no further input from him. He walked through the door and found a woman in blue scrubs sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor outside Flint's stall. The horse was pressed against the back wall. His head was turned toward the aisle. His eyes were half closed. Dunmore stared at this for 4 full seconds. "Who is that?" "Temporary our staff," Kobie said. "She's been managing the behavioral crisis. She's sitting on the floor." "Yes, sir, in my stable." "Yes, sir." Dunmore walked forward. His voice shifted into the register he used when making clear that someone was an inconvenience. "Excuse me." "Farrow," Nina said without looking up. "Miss Farrow," Dunmore said. "I appreciate whatever it is you think you're doing here, but these animals are under the care of our veterinary staff. You need to return to the clinic." Nina looked up at him then. Her face was neutral, not apologetic, not confrontational. "3 of the 4 horses haven't eaten in 48 hours, she said. "Flint has been standing with his head to the wall for 11 days, which means he's stopped performing even the baseline behaviors that would make him appear functional. If you remove me now, you're going to have a harder afternoon than you're already having." Dunmore's expression did something complicated. He was not accustomed to being addressed this way by someone sitting on a concrete floor. "You have no credentials for this work, Ms. Farrow." "I have credentials," Nina said. "They're just not the kind that fit on a standard form." She stood unhurried and looked at him evenly. "You can ask me to leave. That's your call. But I'd suggest you come back at the end of the day and see what this situation looks like." Dunmore looked at Kobie, then at Platt, who had the expression of someone maintaining silence at significant personal cost. "Get her out," he said to Kobie. Politely, he turned and left. Kobie stood in the aisle for a moment after the door closed. He looked at Nina. She had already turned back toward Flint's stall. The horse hadn't moved back to the corner. "You heard him," Kobie said. "I heard him. I need you to go." She looked at Flint for another moment. The horse's ears were forward. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." She picked up her bag and her cold coffee and she walked out. Kobie watched her go. Something sat in his chest that he couldn't locate precisely. He'd been in enough situations to recognize the feeling. The feeling that comes when someone walks out of a room and you're not certain the room is better for it. He almost said something. He didn't. She was 20 yards down the base road when his radio crackled. Weston's voice, stripped of its usual control. "Master Sergeant, Sentinel is out. He's in the loading corridor." The latch on Sentinel's stall had been weakened for 6 weeks, since the day a handler with 2 months of experience had closed it without fully engaging the secondary catch, and nobody had caught it during inspection because inspection had been deprioritized when the staffing dropped below the recommended level in October. Small failures in large systems don't announce themselves, they accumulate. Sentinel was in the loading corridor, 1,200 pounds of confusion and hypervigilance, and 2 handlers were backed against the wall, neither one making eye contact, neither one doing anything wrong, both of them broadcasting exactly the kind of braced, breathless tension that an animal in full threat response reads as confirmation. Kobie came through the door, assessed in 3 seconds, reached for his radio, stopped. The door behind him opened again. He didn't turn around, he knew the footsteps, that quality of pace. Nina Farrow stepped past him into the corridor. She held nothing in her hands. She didn't raise them or lower them, or make any of the specific gestures that come from shelter training videos. She walked directly into Sentinel's space and put herself between the horse and the 2 handlers and let him look at her. Sentinel's head was high, weight shifted back. He was reading everything. She said nothing for 8 seconds. Kobie counted them. Then one word, low enough that Kobie wasn't fully certain he heard it. "Easy." Sentinel's weight shifted forward. His head dropped 3 inches. She took 1 step. His head dropped the rest of the way. He stood in the corridor with his nose 6 inches from her shoulder, eyes half closed, his entire body reorganized around a decision he had made in under 2 seconds. The handlers against the wall had not moved. Kobie turned off his radio. He found her afterwards sitting on the concrete step outside the stable entrance, holding her cold coffee in both hands. He sat down beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. "That's not something you learn in a nursing program," he said. "No," she said. "And it's not something you pick up taking writing lessons on weekends. No." He looked at the side of her face. She was looking at the fence line, at the mountains visible above the tree line, at nothing specific. "You were military," he said. She didn't answer right away. "I was adjacent to military," she said, Adjacent meaning what? Medical support, in contexts that don't have official records. Kobie had spent 21 years in the army. He knew the shape of that sentence, the careful phrasing, the deliberate vagueness. He'd used it himself, describing work done in places that didn't officially exist. He was quiet for a moment. Dunmore's going to pull your access, he said. I know. He already called the clinic administrator. Not surprised. Whatever you've done, wherever you've done it. He stopped, started again. Those animals haven't responded to anyone in weeks. Not to me, not to the handlers, not to Platt. You walked in and changed the entire register of that building in 4 hours. His voice had something in it now. Something at the edge of his professional register. Nina looked down at her coffee. I didn't change it, she said. I started it. What needs to happen is the work that comes after I leave. Consistent handlers, consistent approach, consistent schedule. The same person, the same way, every day, until the animal believes in the pattern more than it believes in the threat. She paused. The fix is the work you do after I'm gone. Kobie looked at her. After I'm gone, he repeated. She looked at him then. For just a second, there was something in her face. Not sadness. The particular matter-of-fact acceptance of a person who has been in enough situations to understand that being right doesn't mean you get to stay in the room. Dunmore made his call, she said. It's his prerogative. His prerogative is going to get those horses killed. That might be true, she said, standing and picking up her bag. But it's still his prerogative. She was halfway down the base road when his radio crackled again, and Weston's voice had nothing controlled about it at all. Flint was on his side in the stall when Kobie got there, and his breathing was wrong in the specific way that means something is ending rather than beginning. Platt was already crouched beside him. Cardiac, or stress-triggered colic progressing to cardiac involvement, Platt said, and her voice was the clinical flat voice she used when she needed her fear not to be in the room with her. I can stabilize him for maybe 40 minutes. I don't have the equipment here for what he actually needs. Kobie looked at the horse. Flint, 11 years old. 3 years of casevac routes where vehicles couldn't fallow, moving the living and the dead, and then 14 months standing in a corner because the one person he'd trusted had gone into a river in the dark and not come back. He pulled out his phone and called Nina. She picked up on the second ring. Flint, he said. He's down, cardiac. Half a second of silence. I'm 8 minutes out, she said. Tell Platt to keep him off his right side. Don't let anyone crowd the stall entrance. Stress load will accelerate the episode. You're not credentialed on this base anymore, Kobie said. I know, she said. I'm coming anyway. She arrived in 6 minutes carrying a hard-sided case, the kind used for emergency veterinary fieldwork by people who had done emergency veterinary fieldwork in actual fields, moving with a different quality than she had all morning, faster, deliberate, the ease stripped back and something else underneath. Platt cleared the entrance. Nina dropped to her knees beside Flint without looking at anything else in the space. The horse opened his eyes when she touched him. His ears moved. Within 3 minutes, his breathing had begun the slow shift towards something less like the end of a thing. Platt watched her work. Where did that kit come from? She said quietly. Not a kit you buy from a veterinary supply company. No, Nina said. She was counting pulse. It's not. Platt looked at Kobie. He had already turned his radio down. At 1400 hours, Flint was on his feet. His color was returning. Platt was clear that she was not calling it a recovery. He needs imaging equipment and a full cardiac workup at a proper facility, she said. What she did bought him time. The fact that he is alive right now is not something I can account for with anything we have in this building. She looked at the hard-sided case. She looked at Kobie. She did not say anything else. Kobie went to call Colonel Margaret Solon, who ran equine program oversight for their region, and who picked up on the second ring and listened to the full outline without interrupting and then said, "Get me the documentation tonight." Incident logs, Platt's 4 recommendations, the contract termination memo, the handler injury reports, all of it. She paused. The civilian. She's not exactly what she says she is, Kobie said. Her record is classified above my access level. But she walked 4 horses in active behavioral crisis back from the edge in under 4 hours, and then she stabilized a cardiac event in an aging bay, gelding with a field kit that belongs to a program that officially doesn't exist. A silence on the line that was adjacent to something. Get me the documentation, Master Sergeant, Solon said. I'll handle the rest. The vehicle at the south gate arrived at 16:30. Two officers. The first introduced herself as Major Andrea Corrigan from Colonel Solin's Regional Oversight Office. The second did not give a name. He had a clearance badge that the security system returned a code for instead of a name. Kobie recognized the code. He cleared them through and went to find Nina first. She was at Flint's stall. The horse was standing close to the gate, his head angled toward the aisle, watching her. Weston was sitting against the opposite wall doing exactly what Nina had shown her, present, quiet, not asking for anything. There are two officers at the south gate, Kobie said. One is from Solin's office. The other has a clearance badge the system won't read. Nina went very still, a fraction of a second. Kobie caught it. He told her the code. The silence lasted 3 seconds. That's the same code as mine, she said. Did you know someone would come? She thought about it honestly. I thought it was possible, she said. When my name appears in formal military documentation, there are systems it still connects to. Someone saw the flag. She said it the way someone says something they'd been carrying for a while. Are you in danger? She considered the question the way you consider questions that are worth considering. I don't think so, she said, but I've been wrong about that before. He held the corridor door. I need you in that room, he said, where I can see you and where whatever this is happens with documentation and witnesses. She looked at Flint, then at Weston sitting against the wall. Same rules, she said to Weston. Low and slow. Don't reach first. Let him come. Yes, ma'am, Weston said. They walked to the administration building. The man in the conference room had silver hair and a face arranged by decades into something almost entirely neutral. When Nina came through the door, he looked at her with the specific recognition of a person who has not seen someone in a long time and is still adjusting to the sight. Nina, he said. Nina had gone completely still from the moment she saw him. Director Parrish, she said. And the room, Kobie understood in the space of those two words, had just become something entirely different from what he'd walked into it expecting. Director Carl Parrish said he wasn't there to pull her back in. He said it in the deliberate way people say things they actually mean. Her name in a formal military document attached to a regional welfare inquiry had activated a flag on her sealed file. He had come personally to assess the scope before anyone else got involved. Nina heard the explanation and then looked at him the way someone looks at a person they have a long history with and are no longer willing to perform for. 4 horses, she said. Combat veterans. In acute crisis because the administrator of this facility cut their behavioral health contract to save $9,600. Her voice was even. One of them was dying this afternoon. I stabilized him. That's everything that happened today. Parrish held her gaze. That's not quite all of it. Everything else was before today, she said, and you know everything that was before today. Platt had the expression of someone who was tired and capable and willing, all 3 at the same time. Corrigan made notes. Parrish asked precise questions and got precise answers, and the 2 questions Nina declined to answer he did not push. What assembled itself across the table in the flat language of incident reports and vet logs and access records was a morning that was substantially worse than Dunmore's version of it. The 4 ignored recommendations with documented timestamps. The contract terminated without veterinary consultation in violation of base welfare protocol. The handler injury log in which 3 of the 4 injuries prior to burns had been recorded as minor incidents and not escalated. The fencing budget reallocation, referencing a project completed 5 months before the contract was cut. Corrigan read through the handler injury log with an expression that got progressively flatter, which Kobie understood as a woman who was professionally furious and was managing it the way her rank required. Parrish placed a photograph on the table near the end of the session. He slid it toward Nina. She read what was written on the back. She read it twice. Kobie watched her face do something it hadn't done all day. A small, involuntary movement at the corner of her expression, honest and quickly put away. Where did this come from? Dunmore's office, Parrish said. An administrative assistant scanned it into the base records 8 months ago during a routine records consolidation. She wouldn't have known what she was looking at. Once it was in the base system, it was accessible to anyone above a certain clearance threshold. Kobie leaned forward slightly and looked at the photograph. Older, faded at the edges. A younger Nina in field clothing he couldn't precisely identify, crouching beside a dark horse in a rocky landscape. Her hands were on the horse's neck. The horse had its head turned toward her. On the back, partially redacted in the scan, 3 words remained legible. Kobie read them. Found you. Stay. That photograph should not be in any accessible file, Nina said quietly. I know, Parrish said. His voice had something in it that hadn't been there before. Who's the horse? Kobie said. He said it quietly, half expecting not to get an answer. Nina looked at the photograph for a long moment. His name was Atlas, she said. Belgian warmblood gelding. He was assigned to my unit for 3 years. A pause. He died on a mission that doesn't have an official record. His handler wrote those words on the back of this photograph and gave it to me 2 days before the mission. Her voice was steady and precise. I didn't know a copy existed. Parrish said nothing. For once. The nothing was the correct call. The formal site inspection arrived 48 hours later. The team was systematic and did not telegraph its conclusions. The findings were thorough and not kind to Dunmore. The 4 veterinary recommendations documented and timestamped, received and not acted on. The contract termination executed without veterinary consultation. The handler injury log in which 3 incidents had been classified as minor and not escalated in violation of protocol. The budget reallocation citing a fencing project completed 5 months before the contract was cut, using funds from a separate line item that had already been allocated. The auditor's note on that section was 4 words. No legitimate basis identified. Dunmore was placed on administrative leave before the inspection team left the base. The behavioral health contract was reinstated the following week at full value, plus an operational adjustment, retroactive to the month it had been cut. Colonel Solon approved it before noon. The contracted behavioral specialist, Dr. Owen Greer, returned the following Monday, read through the notebook documentation Nina had produced during her remaining days, and told Kobie it was the most operationally precise equine behavioral assessment he had seen produced outside a clinical research setting. Kobie told him who'd written it. Greer set the notebook down. The temporary ear nurse, he said. Among other things, Kobie said. Flint went to the Fort Laramie Veterinary Facility for his cardiac workup on day 3. He came back on day 8 with a medication protocol and a stall reassignment to the south end of the stable, where morning light came through the upper window and fell warm on the east wall for 3 hours. A small adjustment. The first morning after the change, he finished his full ration before Weston had completed her check, which she noted in the log with the careful clinical precision of someone who is pleased and is not going to say so in official documentation. She texted Kobie a photo. He forwarded it to Nina. She sent back 2 words, keep going. Private Byrne came back on limited duty 2 weeks later with 2 healed ribs and the specific determination of a 19-year-old who has decided that being afraid of something is not the same as being defeated by it. He was the first handler to use the new approach protocol with Sentinel. Consistent entry angle, low energy, no direct eye contact, stopping 8 feet from the animal and doing nothing. Sentinel watched him for 11 minutes and then crossed the remaining distance himself. Byrne sent the timestamp to Kobie. Kobie sent it to Nina. She sent back, good, that's the work. Director Parrish called the week. Nina came back with the final determination. Her complete service record, all 12 years of it, had been formally declassified at the appropriate security level and entered into the official military record. The commendations that had been sealed were attached. The unit she had served with, officially disbanded 7 years earlier, now had every name belonging to it in the right place, including hers. Back pay adjustment, VA eligibility restored, formal service acknowledgement, and the handler who had written 3 words on the back of a photograph in a rocky landscape in a country the citation didn't name. His family had been notified the previous year during the formal closure process. His name was in the record. Nina held the phone for a while after Parrish finished. She said okay. She said thank you. She said she needed some time. Parrish said he understood. He had the voice of a man who had been carrying his own version of this for longer than he'd planned to. On the morning of her first official day as consulting specialist for the Fort Crestwood Equine Rehabilitation Program, Nina walked in at 0630 and found the framed citation on the wall of the stable entrance. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Kobie stood beside her without saying anything. Developed in partnership with Nina Farrow, consulting specialist, Equine Behavioral Rehabilitation Program. Framework developed during the Fort Crestwood rehabilitation crisis. November, her name, on a wall, in a building where people would pass it every morning until it became part of the background. "You could have asked me," she said. "Yes," Kobie said. She looked at it for another moment. Then she reached for the sign-in clipboard hanging beside it and signed her name on the daily access log. Date, time, name. The most ordinary gesture in the world. The kind of thing done hundreds of times a day in facilities like this by people who think nothing of it. She held the pen for a second after she finished writing. Kobie watched her. He understood why. It was her real name on a real document in a real building attached to work that was on the record and was not going to be sealed and was not going to be redacted and was not going anywhere. She put the pen back on the clipboard. "Same time tomorrow?" she said. "Same time tomorrow," Kobie said. And Flint, at the end of the corridor, came to his gate before she reached it, and the morning was cold and clear, and the Wyoming mountains were exactly where they had always been, and nothing about any of it was perfect, and all of it was enough.